Welcome back. We are Gentlemen United, and you are in the Man Cave. In the show tonight, I'll be talking again to Jasmin Newman, who is my guest on what is now our most watched show called Wave Feminism and the Men's Rights Movement. Jasmin is joining us again tonight, all the way from Australia, to give us a recap on the third International Conference on Men's Issues, which just took place in Gold Coast, Australia. Jasmin spent a lot of time with some of the most well-known MRAs, including Deepika Bhardwaj, Mark Latham, and Bettina Arndt, Anti-Feminist Karen Straughn, and former feminist and Red Pill director Cassie Jaye. She's a certified coach for men in distress and continues to be a positive force for change, supporting men's rights and raising awareness of men's issues in Australia and around the world. Trigger warning. If talking about men or men's issues offends you, I invite you to stop watching right now and go on to the next YouTube clip. Okay, with that out of the way, whether you consider yourself a feminist, a men's rights activist, something in between, or neither, this show is guaranteed to be informative, engaging, and maybe a bit angering for some. I believe the way to grow and learn to appreciate each other begins with listening. As always, for those watching this broadcast live on YouTube, feel free to add your comments and questions in the comment bar. I'll watch for them throughout the show, and we'll incorporate them into the show with time permitting. Joining us tonight is Jasmin Newman, and of course, you, our viewers. I'm Sean Best, and I'm your host and moderator. Jasmin, how are you?
Good morning.
I know you've got a whole lot on your plate. I appreciate you so much for joining us.
Sure.
All right, so you were at the ICMI conference. What was the feeling on the ground leading up to the conference? Australia is known as a hotbed for anti-men's rights activists, having shut down several screenings of the Red Pill movie. Were there any encounters from protesters at the venue?
No, look, I mean, first of all, I need to caveat that I wasn't officially involved in the organisation of ICMI. I was just there as an attendee. But from what I understand, no, there wasn't any whatsoever. I think the conference organisers did a pretty good job of keeping the venue to invitees only. Or to delegates only. So, you know, it wasn't kind of disclosed. And also I think having it on the Gold Coast kind of helped because, you know, it's sort of away from the major cities, although a very attractive place to be. But there wasn't. I mean, I think we were all half expecting there to be, especially considering the protests at the Sydney University for the Red Pill. So, you know, it was... you know, it was exciting. Leading up to it was exciting, you know, when you could kind of put that aside, because it is an ugly mess when you get protesters coming along that want to try and stop the very real conversations that we need to be having. You know, I think it was, it was exciting. It was exciting to know that so many great speakers from around the world and around Australia were all coming together in one place. Australia's a big country. I know on your side of the world you tend to kind of forget that, but it is a big country. So it was a big deal. You know, we had people from all over.
Well, you remember I'm Canadian too. I'm from the Commonwealth, so I know how big Australia is. I may live in the U.S., but I'm aware of things outside of our borders. We Canadians are very well aware. Americans don't know what happens outside of their borders. So, but yes, you're right. And I was excited about that conference, it coming up from the time it got announced. And I noticed, now that you mentioned it, that they didn't really identify a specific location. And I know that when they did other conferences after the first conference in Detroit was a debacle when people were literally threatening people's lives, and they had to have police and they had to move the location. So I know there were some places, I think when they showed the Red Pill movie, that they announced the movie was going to play, they announced the city was going to play in, but they didn't announce the actual location of the theater until the very last minute, and only to those who bought tickets, so that, you know, these protesters couldn't show up and start disrupting things and threatening people's safety. So I was going to get into some of the meat here, but before I get into that, tell us a bit about your experience. I know that you had a long drive to get from, I think it was Merimbula to Gold Coast. And I don't know if I pronounced that right. And you had some guests in the in your car.
Well, yes, and I did more or less go all the way from Merimbula. So I was home with my children and in Merimbula for about a week leading up to the event, and I had There was a young German girl, Karen, known online as Karen McFly, and first time to Australia, and she was coming out just for ICMI. So I arranged for her to get the bus up to Merimbula, so I picked her up there. We ran around, looked at some kangaroos, and you know, I took her to the beach, and it was 5 o'clock on a winter's evening. She wanted to go for a swim. But yeah, so then we came to Sydney, and then we had the Honey Badgers meet up. So we drove, I think it took us, it was a long trip because I stopped a few times, but I think it took us about 9 hours to get to Sydney. We got in, rested for a minute, showered, changed, turned around, drove back into the city, and went to the Honey Badgers meetup. So the Honey Badgers were in Australia for ICMI, and so they're doing a meetup in Sydney. So we went along to that, had a couple of busy days, went to Karen Straugh's talk on the topic was, is marriage too risky for men? And it was held at the Sydney Institute, which is, it was a really great venue, and it was a really great crowd for Karen to be able to present that talk too, because rather than speaking in the echo chamber of the men's movement, she was speaking outside to other people who would normally identify as feminists, or, you know, like most of us, just very neutral to the whole subject. And it was confronting. It was confronting for some of the people that were there. So that was great. And then we all came back here for the night because we had a very early start the next day with Karen Straughn and her partner Mike and another colleague and Karen McFly, and off we went for a 14-hour drive to the Gold Coast. So yeah,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
It was a long tour.
It was a long tour. I imagine Karen was both accustomed to the weather. She's from Saskatchewan, from what I know, and I know Saskatchewan winters. I'm pretty sure there's no place in Australia that gets winters like Saskatchewan.
Well, yeah, no, we don't really do winter here on that level. It's pretty mild, but
yeah.
You know, the bad thing was, I suppose, it was one of those. We had like a fortnight of just rain and drizzle, so they were here through that whole event. But anyway, you know, that's weather.
It's been raining here in Atlanta, Georgia for 2 months, and that's unusual for us. It's normally sunny and warm throughout the summer, and it's raining right now. It's been raining for ages. All right, so to get back to the meat of it, so there was a lot of controversy following Cassie Jaye's interviews on several local Australian TV shows leading up to the conference, including, I believe it was called The Sunrise and The Project. In fact, I heard that the network that airs The Sunrise pulled down the interview after the barrage of callers blasted them for critiquing the movie without actually having watched it.
Yeah.
What was the reaction on the ground at ICMI? Because I think she had those interviews before the conference. When after the controversy broke, like what happened on the ground after all that?
Oh, look, we were disgusted. So we actually watched the project segment from the car while we were driving up to the Gold Coast. So it was on the evening before. And, you know, I received a text message from Bettina saying that Cassie was really, you know, quite disheartened because they did a 15-minute interview that they cut down to about 4 or 5 minutes, and they edited out all her salient answers. And in, you know, what appeared to her, you know, she felt like it made her look a bit silly. So we watched it as it screened from the car. And she did a sterling job. You know, even when they tried to dismantle her, she still held her own. So, you know, we were really quite buoyed up by that, you know, in as much as she answered the questions incredibly well. And even though they tried to make her look bad, she still came out shining, and they looked like absolute buffoons. And they hadn't watched the, you know, they hadn't watched the, oh, actually, no, sorry, on the project, maybe they had. It was Sunrise who hadn't watched the interview. But, you know, they're asking essentially like almost irrelevant questions of her. She's a filmmaker, and she's here to talk about her film. She's not here as an expert on domestic violence in Australia or even on men's issues in Australia. She's here to talk about her film, which was on the men's movement, and they could not stick to the topic.
Yeah, that character, Andrew O'Keefe, he tried everything he could. He's I'm not sure what the proper word in Australia would be for him, but he's a jackass in my book. And he tried everything he could to character assassinate Cassie, to lead her or to ask leading questions by setting up a premise that was a faulty premise on the basis of incomplete and unexisting facts, acted like they were able to critique a movie, and then admitted that they hadn't actually watched it. And the funny thing that I saw was shortly after Cassie got back, and when she wasn't feeling well, they claimed on the show and on the broadcast that, well, your producer never sent us, or your publicist never sent us the link. She sent out a copy of the email. Here's the copy of the email that was sent out a month before with the links. We sent out, I think she sent out twice since that point in time, and then they kind of glossed past it. And the part that I found was very interesting was when she started to clarify that part, they started blah, 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 talking over her. So she couldn't get her point out. I mean, it was the most juvenile, childish, middle school, la 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 I had ever seen, from professionals. So it was disappointing.
Yeah, you're very right. And he is a jackass. There's not a term we use a lot here, but you're absolutely spot on. It's absolutely perfect for him. He and his co-host Monique, whatever her name is, that it was disgusting. It really was terrible journalism, and they did try and gloss over it, and they looked bloody stupid. The fact that they, Cassie asked them, "Have you seen the film?" Oh no, well, we tried. I mean, it was absolute rubbish.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
And it was an outright lie. You're right, they did pull it down from their Facebook page because they were getting absolutely smashed in the comments, and I think they underestimated just how many even how many feminists actually would speak out against them. So, people who aren't non-feminist, or who aren't, non or anti-feminist, or who aren't heavily involved in the men's movement, everybody was outraged because it was disgusting. And it was, it wasn't even so much that it was an attack on a woman. It was just that it was an attack, and it was really poor, shoddy journalism. And again, I mean, I think, and understandably, when you're kind of the meat that's being, decimated in those kind of situations, as Cassie was, it makes you feel terrible. So Cassie was, she was quite upset about it. There were strict guidelines put in place for that interview, in that it had to be done live so that there could be no editing, and Andrew O'Keefe was not to be involved. And surprise, here's Andrew O'Keefe. And she's then, on camera, can't do anything about it. So, it was a railroad. But on their Facebook feed, they got absolutely smashed. And before they pulled it down, I was sitting there just reading all these comments from women who were saying, I'm a feminist and I'm disgusted at this. This is not the level of argument that we need to be having on these issues. Let men speak up. Let men have their conference. Let men have a documentary. Why do we care? Why are we trying to silence this? And that seems to be the overriding sentiment in Australia at the moment, is that while the media is peddling a dead horse on trying to flog men's issues, the underlying sentiment is really bubbling up into quite a positive frame of we're okay to talk about this, and of course, we have a major problem with suicide in Australia, with male suicide in Australia, with homelessness, with a whole variety of issues, with men's mental health, and with the family law system. So people are aware of that.
One of the things I have to say, just to get it out there, is that I'm obviously not Australian. I'm Canadian, but I live in the U.S. And I have to say, when I saw that, I said, look, I think the average Australian who's neutral on the issue, either not engaged in either on the feminist side or the MRA side, is going to find this an insult to their intelligence. And they're also going to find it an embarrassment, because they had a host from a foreign country. They were going to be, obviously the show is going to be on an international platform. And these, for lack of better terminology, buffoons, could theoretically be perceived as, oh, they represent Australians. I'm glad when I read through a lot of the comments, because I read through a lot of them as well, that a lot of Australians said, listen, these two fools, or these four, because the project had Waleed, what's his name, and the other, and the other nameless blonde, they don't represent Australia or Australians, and I was very, I mean, I had a big smile on my face. I said, you know what, Australians are very proud and intelligent people. These people are an insult to their intelligence, and Australians will speak up, and they certainly did. So I'm glad to see how the response happened, and I realized that the Sunrise pulled down the clip. I was able to find it somewhere else. I think Cassie might have had a copy or something like that, but I've shared it with my team before. What's that?
I think we've all got copies.
Oh yes, I would take my phone and if I had to, and copy it on the screen, so I had a copy. But I shared it with my audience so that people can see for themselves and make their own conclusions on was she fairly treated or not. Anybody who had any modicum of intelligence would see it was a complete it was a complete shambles. Yeah. Okay, so now we're going to go into a couple of other folks. Now I know Bettina Arndt, who is a local Australian, a longtime men's rights activist. Did you get to meet her? I see that she has been doing the circuit now since the Cassie getting accosted by these buffoons, and she's been sort of setting people straight. Like she's been sort of, getting them back, in line now that, everyone's kind of left Gold Coast and gone back to their different corners of the planet. Did you get to meet her, and have you spoken to her before or since all this controversy and her setting the media straight?
Yes. So Bettina called me roughly 2 years ago now, I think. So we've been connected and chatting for quite a long time, and it was was when Bettina called me. She won't mind if I say this. Bettina's been around in media for like 40 years, and so for me as a child, I used to watch Bettina on TV, and I always loved her. I always loved what she had to say. And then my phone rings and it comes up with Bettina Arndt, and I'm like, wow. So I'm sitting on my couch going, Bettina, she's on the phone. Like, there's nobody in the room, but I was so excited. So yeah, we've been chatting for a little while, and always around men's issue stuff and topics for articles between the two of us, and in the broader issues that we're being faced. But we only met for the first time at Karen's talk in Sydney. So prior to that, we hadn't actually met face to face. We'd missed a couple of opportunities, and we sat down at Karen's talk and sort of went, well, wow, I can't believe it's taken us so long to actually meet. She's, I actually just sent her a text message of thanks this morning, because she's actually been the power horse behind both Cassie and Karen, and largely ICMI, for, this whole tour. And so she's done all of the, a lot of the organising. I'm not sure exactly what parts Cassie's team has done, but I know that, Bettina hosted Karen and as well as Cassie, and she's put a lot of work into getting a lot of this up and running. And it was, I'm sure, very stressful for her, and I'm sure probably felt like a thankless task at times, because, the media was just, quite difficult. There were aspects of the media which were great, but, it was mostly Sky News and the alternate media. But the mainstream media was absolutely appalling. But yeah, Bettina's done a lot of work, and she's put in a lot of effort to, get things up and running, and she's awesome. She really is terrific. No, she's a true professional. She's been in media for 40 years. She's a journalist, and frontline media person, as well as a psychologist, and she's incredible. And Bettina gave a talk at the conference, so she gave an hour-long presentation, which was phenomenal. The lineup of speakers was fantastic, and in part of that, she said, she's always liked to talk about the unpopular issues. That's always
like me. I love that.
Exactly. Who doesn't love that? I'm sitting there going, well, what's new about that? That's me to a T. But so she started out as she really rose to prominence in the media here as a sex therapist back in the days when it wasn't really cool to talk about sex, and because she had worked with so many men, and she was she had a very liberal approach to talking about sex, then a lot like the way kind of things happened for me. as well. It was like it was an unpopular truth, and men really wanted to talk about some of these issues, and so that's kind of how she came to the fore. But yeah, she's terrific.
Yes, I think she's fantastic. Now, you spent lots and lots of time with one of the most well-known men's issue advocates, I think she calls herself an anti-feminist, not a men's issue advocate. Canadian Karen Straughn from Girl Rights What? How was that experience? What was it like to meet Karen for the first time?
Yeah, you know, I think it was a little hard to hide the smile on my face. Karen was excellent company, and you know, we had, as I said before, we had 14 hours in the car, and a you know, a busy agenda in the days leading up to the event, you know, the depth of the conversations was phenomenal, and it was just great to have you know, really deep conversations that would just go from one thing to the next to the next, and it was really good fun. And I mean, I don't agree with Karen on everything. Karen wouldn't agree with me on everything, but we're able to have those conversations and to hash it out. And I believe that, you know, listening to those conversations that extend past what you think, and either being able to sit back and go, wow, okay, well, that's a different perspective, I'm going to think on that some more, or, you know, I don't really agree with that. I see things this way, but that's okay. You know, I come to this with a different experience than what you do, and it's that kind of learning that you know, we all grow from. You know, we all have little sort of aha moments, and you know, all I can say about Karen is that, you know, she's as real in person as what she is online. She doesn't change for anyone. She doesn't falter. There's no persona to, you know, hide behind. There's no secret there. She's just Karen Straughn, and she's amazing. She was very, very good company.
And that's what makes her amazing. And that, you know, I'll plug her here. Canadians are usually very easy to talk to.
But you know, they are, and that's also an Aussie Canadian kind of thing too. You know, we tend to kind of get along pretty well. But yeah, she was, and her partner Mike as well was also a really interesting man, and really great to talk to. A very heartfelt man, and I really enjoyed his company. And you know, overall, it was a really great experience. I mean, she's a beautiful human being. She has you know, blazed a trail for the rest of us to be able to speak about men's issues by having such a strong approach. And while you know, more, I mean, I tend to sit more on the middle ground in terms of not wanting to be, you know, I don't want to silence conversations by being antagonistic, but you know, when you read Karen's stuff, it's like it shouldn't be antagonistic. You know, it shouldn't be. It should be okay to talk about this stuff. But of course, somebody has had to blaze the trail, and that's, you know, that's largely what she's done for people like me to be able to come in as a more moderate voice and sort of go, well, you know, here we are, these are the issues that we're talking about, because someone else cut that down for me. So yeah, she's a real blessing. I'm really grateful to her.
Karen cuts to the chase fast. She doesn't beat around the bush. You know, I have to say there are three people that really I learned a lot from. Obviously, Dr. Warren Farrell. The man is an absolute genius. He has a way of delivering things in a non-threatening fashion. And he has a way of delivering information to you in a way that you really can't argue with him, and it's hard to get angry with him. I mean, some people have figured out a way to do that. I'm not sure how. Like, the guy's a teddy bear. But he is extremely bright. He's extremely articulate, and he knows exactly how to deliver the message based on his audience. So I learned a lot from him. I've listened to almost all of his books, audiobooks. Karen Straughn's another one. I learned things listening to her, like the White Feather Campaign, and all these other the way the laws were back in the late 19th, early 20th century, and how they affected men, things I had no clue about. So I learned a ton from her. So I hold her in high regard because of that. There's a few other people who also fall in that category. How about Deepika Bhardwaj, the director of Martyrs of Marriage. Was this her first appearance at ICMI? And I mean, I kind of get the sense from the pictures I saw. I know you took pictures with all of them. I hope you don't mind if I share them with my audience. She looked like she was part shell-shocked and part excited to be there. Is that a fair representation of what the picture looks like?
That's actually probably a really good representation. I arranged accommodation for Deepika to stay with me. We were, I mean, people were so keen to see this conference go ahead and to support us all. And a friend of mine's girlfriend gave up her entire house for us to stay in, which was incredible. She moved in with her boyfriend for the weekend, and I'm still trying to work out a way that I can repay that. But Deepika, I arranged for Deepika to stay with us, and it was phenomenal. So she's a beautiful human being. The men's rights movement in India is very fractured, but like it is anywhere, there are people coming from all different schools of thought. There's Deepika's documentary, Martyrs of Marriage. Oh boy, what a moving documentary. It's very, when it comes online, you really need to see it, and I'm sure that you will, because I know you're so interested in these topics. If what's going on in India was going on in Australia, I think I said this in a post, like our suicide rate would quadruple overnight. It's absolutely appalling what's going on there, and she's done a magnificent job of bringing men's issues in India to an international stage. Now, she crowdfunded to get herself to Australia and to have her show presented at ICMI. Interestingly, certain factions of the men's movement tried to have that stopped, of the MRAs in India tried to have that stopped. And that's a part of the I will say the MRA movement, so as opposed to the men's movement in general, that really needs to be cut out. It's like there's a very toxic core to the movement where they're very anti any woman who's going to speak up on their behalf. And really what they're doing is very, very damaging. And so Deepika had all of that on her shoulders as well. I can tell you that she's a bright, engaging, beautiful, very heartfelt person. She started this documentary because of what her brother had gone through, and she has an ability and a knack to be able to tell people stories, and she did so very eloquently. And I mean, I for one am very grateful that she was able to do this, because I think the more the world can see what's going on around us, we can see that this isn't an isolated problem, then it's not exclusive to the West, that men in India are struggling too. And I never got to talk to Deepika about this directly, but I remember when another Karen here, Karen Hodgkins, did the Dad documentary. She put up a statistic that one man in India, or a man suicides every 9 seconds in India. Now that's catastrophic, but we think of India as a patriarchal dominating society, and while they may be more patriarchal in some ways than what Australia is, there is definitely a problem with violence against women in India, that men are killing themselves every 9 seconds. And even when you calculate out the ratio of population, per capita, they're still way ahead of what any of the rest of us are, and that's quite devastating.
It is, and I've watched a little bit of. I saw Deepika's TED Talk. I'll post the link card here for people to watch it. And I know in India there's some unique aspects to men's issues, and one of those very prominent aspects is dowry laws that we don't have in the West. And that's used as a it's basically used as a weapon against many men. But you're right. On the other side of that, of course, I know that there are some very unfair ways with the way men and women interact. It's a cultural thing that goes back probably thousands of years. And to have a woman speak on behalf of a man, there is some aspect of that patriarchal type mentality. So I know that her challenges are a little bit unique compared to the challenges that you'd have in the West. But, I applaud her for standing up for her brother and for these issues and speaking out. I will, again, I'll post a link to her TED Talk, and, whenever Martyrs of Marriage comes out, I will find a way to get that out to the masses so that people can see what's happening in India.
Interestingly, the anti-dowry laws are not as relevant in Australia, but there are people being prosecuted in Australia with those same laws. So Indian people are taking the dowry into Australian family courts and fighting over that. I'm not sure how that works. I'm not sure how that's even possible, but apparently it is. And
right.
So, they're also part, and I mean, that's the focus. The dowry laws are the focus of her documentary, and it's absolutely hideous. It's really bad. So it's definitely something for the world stage, because if it's happening here, it's also happening in Canada, it's happening in England, right? It's happening in the entire Commonwealth, New Zealand. So, and whoever else is in the Commonwealth, I'm sure there's more than just us, right?
Not really.
So yeah, it's very, very interesting.
Yeah, no, I applaud her for standing up and for going all the way out to Australia to promote her movie. And
big deal for somebody from India. There was quite a good contingent all around from India. I think there was 4 or 5 people who came along, and another coach, a fellow coach by the name of Anil, somebody. I'm sorry, Anil, I've forgotten your last name. But he gave a fantastic presentation as well, and then just some other supporters of what they're doing in supporting men going through family law. And they've also got their detractors, but I don't understand. I don't understand all of this. Why people from within want to cut people down, but they're doing a particular job, servicing a particular sector of people in a particular way, and it's a way that actually resonates with me as another coach. And his method is really to, before he will help them with their family law matter through support groups, he's getting them to work on themselves and getting them into a good place, into a healthy mindset, into feeling strong and confident, and a bit less stress-free, or a bit less stressed, a lot more stress-free, able to be able to present themselves. Because unless you go in, this is a battle for life. And in India, it can take up to 20 years to get through. Oh my
God, that's why a lot of guys just say, I'm done, I'm out.
I'm out of here. Why am I going to? And because they're dragging their entire family through it too. It's not just about the man. Their entire family is in court. So, there's a lot of that going on. So he's doing really, really great work with a particular sector for those people who are interested in, being on, taking that path. It's not for everyone, just like it isn't here.
Right, exactly, or here. You have to really believe it to pick it up and talk about it. I mean, I've even noticed within my group and on my channel, like I said before, the last show that you and I did together, Third Wave Feminism and the Men's Rights Movement, very, very quickly became the most watched show that I've had. And I've had shows that go back to November, December. Now, I didn't get a lot of feedback on it, but I know that there are people who, in the larger group that in the Man Cave by Gentlemen United on Facebook, that are neutral. They don't know anything about it, or some that are feminists, some that are aware of men's rights issues, or men's rights and men's issues. But the whole point of it really was to raise people's awareness. I'm not trying to recruit anybody anywhere. My viewers are intelligent people, and they can make up their own minds. My whole thing is, I will present information to you. You do with it as you will. If we go back and forth in conversation, I'll listen to what your points are. You listen to mine. Like you said just now with Karen Straughn, I might learn something new. You might learn something new. Now, I've been in a lot of these online conversations on men's issues for a number of years now. So I've seen the way that people approach it. I can see the lead up. I can see the Andrew O'Keefe laying the foundation where he's trying to smooth you out a little bit and lower your guard so you can kind of stick in the eye with the stick. I see all that stuff coming. So, it's not so much about trying to prove myself right or anybody else wrong. It's about, these are things that you should be aware of when you're making these statements, you're having this position on something, that there's stuff that you're missing out on. You're missing certain information, and there's people in your life that you care about that you may not realize that you are you're treating badly or you're ignoring them.
Yeah, right? Exactly.
So now, did you have a chance to, I know Mark Latham was in Canada, but I kind of get the sense that, did he get back before the ICMI let out?
Well, he was back in time to give his presentation. Yes. So yeah, he flew back in and straight to the Gold Coast.
Good stuff. And Janet Bloomfield, aka Judgy Bitch, was she there too or no?
No, there was no. So she wasn't there at all, which was sad for me because I love her. She's another trailblazer that I think we have to be incredibly grateful for. And once again, I don't agree with everything she says. I don't agree with a lot of her strategies. But actually, interestingly, a Facebook post of hers that I shared some 2 years ago came back up in my newsfeed this morning, and I just went, wow, that is just, she really is, to me, she's an icon, because she's, agree or disagree, anybody who's got the guts to do what she's done, I think, these are the conversations we need to be having, and they are confronting. Some things are really confronting in the world. Good. We need to build up resilience, because, if we're going to be triggered by somebody else's opinion on something that they've explored, that they've investigated, that they've researched, then we've got a real problem in society. And we fought long and hard for the right to free speech, to be able to say these things. I think where there's a problem with free speech is when it's not based on education and research, and it's just done in terms of just being a hateful bigot or whatever. Then we have a problem. But most stuff that people in the men's movement or talking about identity politics are doing has been based on considerable research. I saw an interesting comment online the other day saying if these men, talking about men in the men's movement, learned about feminism, they would understand it better. And I said, oh, no. We know.
Well-versed.
We do more learning on feminism. I mean, I'm writing a book at the moment, and I'm forcing myself to watch documentaries on feminist documentaries. I'm reading Hansard documents, from 1910, what was it? The earliest one was like 1890, I think, that I read, on women getting the vote, and what those conversations actually were compared to what, the average person on the street. I could go down and talk to a feminist on the street and they would say, blah, 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 we had to fight for the right to vote. Well, actually, no, you didn't. There was that it's a whole different conversation. So, people in the men's movement tend to understand feminism better than what feminists do.
One of the things I learned from listening to Karen was that the assumption that most people would have is that women didn't have the right to vote, but that all men did. And the reality of it is, all men did not have the right to vote either. The only men that had the right to vote were men of influence.
Well, so one of the reasons I came across this Hansard document was looking for something for Karen, and because she had referenced something that she could no longer find the link for. So anyway, I found that link, and so in reading that Hansard document, what became obvious. So this was Hansard from 1910. And what became obvious was the men who were, and you're right, it was only people of privilege, wealth and status, but what it was people who paid taxes, right? So suffrage was only available to people who paid taxes. The right to vote, you had to earn money. So what the argument was in Parliament on that day was, if we give women the right to vote, men were saying, I'm concerned about this because that means they have to work. So, and we don't want our women to have to work. If they want to work, that's fine, but we don't want them to have to work. So if they've all got the right to vote.
In order to have the right to vote.
Yeah, exactly. So they were concerned about women's welfare. It wasn't a matter of saying, no, we don't want women to vote, that will ruin society. That never happened. It was, and there were so many women who were saying, we don't want to have to go to work. We want to take care of our family and our husbands and our home and you know, to be living our life. We don't want to have to go to work. We don't want to have to pay taxes. So,
and in those days, women's work wasn't like telecommuting and dialing in. It was labor. It was hard labor. And labor where men died early because the labor was so hard. And that was before unions, it was before there was union laws where you couldn't make people work a number of hours. I mean, they're literally working to death. And by the way, you're going to work my wife to death too.
So this, I mean, the belief that you know, men were virulently opposed to, you know, women having the vote because it was going to ruin society is absolute rubbish. It's absolute rubbish, and it's completely and utterly baseless. And interestingly, in the Suffragettes movie, that's actually quite obvious. So, you know, they've shown that you know, through the Suffragettes movie as well. So they've actually shown that themselves, but it's not what they talk about.
Right. Right. Well, that's it. You got to spin it, right? You got to spin it. The one thing that you did
digress there.
Right. The one thing you did touch on that I wanted to just kind of put the fine point on is one of the things I've noticed is there are people in the men's rights movement who are as ideological and closed-minded as there are feminists, but I find that they make up a very small percentage from my experience. The vast majority, like, for example, like yourself, you said you and Karen sat in the same car. You didn't agree on everything, but you guys were able to have a dialogue, respect each other's opinions without screeching and yelling and pointing fingers and calling names. I mean, there comes a point in time where being an adult means you're not always going to agree, and it's okay to disagree. And my experience so far in this arena has always been, look, I don't agree with everything that I hear, but that's okay. Their job isn't to necessarily convince me. It's to say, here's some information, here's my perspective. I can either say, you know what, I see where that comes from, I see your research is done, or if that's your position, your perspective, that, to your point, might be based on personal experience that I don't have, and I may not see it that way. It may make me say, you know what, I never really considered it that way. And now that I think about this, that makes sense, or I may disagree. But either way, the fact that we're having the conversation is the point.
But yeah, I mean, it's simple respect of the fact that you know, in terms of Karen Straughn, I mean, I agree with probably 90% or 95% of what she says. But there are some things where I go, oh, you know, I don't agree with that, but I see where your perspective has come from. And other occasions where it's like, that's not what I've been thinking, but hold on, I might need to, you know, I'll pull back now because, you know, I either need to invest into understanding the background to that, or I need to just shut up. It's not that hard. You know, I can just accept that that's different. But some people have a real problem with that, and I'm not sure why.
So a couple of questions, because I know you have to wrap up pretty soon here. I saw that Paul Elam video conference did, I think, from the U.S. Now, how did his portion of the conference go, and were there any anti-MRAs in the conference? I think you probably answered that question already at the beginning. There wasn't any ruckus going on, but I think he did kind of video conference in for a period. Is that a fair statement? Is that correct?
Yeah. So there weren't any protesters. You know, not everybody who was there was an MRA. I mean, I no longer call myself an MRA, although I did for a while. But there were people there who from the broader men's movement, who care about men's issues, who care about male suicide, who work in men's well-being, various different mental health professionals. There was a lot of us there. There was a broad spectrum there. To answer your question on Paul, he initially they were trying to hook him up in a live feed as part of the Q&A, and it was difficult with the you know, the signal and what have you. And so unfortunately, and I don't know if any more was planned or not, but all we really saw of Paul was an introduction that went for about 20 minutes, which was pre-recorded. And I think pre-recorded just so that it could be shown clearly. And you know, in the sort of an hour or two before the segment, it wasn't done, you know, weeks ago. Yeah, it was great to see him. You know, Paul has his detractors, and I understand a lot of the reasons why he has detractors. You know, he again has blazed a trail that other people weren't prepared to do. I think in hindsight, he understands that his, you know, he understands where a lot of the conflict, particularly with mainstream media, has come in. He's now re-emerging into, you know, working more in the mental health realm rather than activism. And I'm very grateful to him for that transition. I think it's very much needed. Unfortunately, a lot of past stuff will stick with him anyway. But you know what? The world's not about them. You know, it's Paul's life is about Paul and his work and his legacy. And while, you know, what he's said in the past may be seen as being really antagonistic, it was also at a time when women were allowed to say whatever they wanted about men, that they were going to bash their men, or that they were going to, you know, who hasn't punched their guy, you know, like, yes, I have, and you know, I'm violent all the time and all of this kind of stuff. And when men say that, it's not okay. So he's done he's done really important work, and I do pay him a lot of credit for that. But not only for what he's done, but putting aside how that's, you know, kind of negatively attracted, but that he's evolved over time, that he's now going into a new phase. And I think that that's very important. It shows a great deal of self-reflection, and I think that it's I think that's a really good thing.
I was actually watching, I can't recall how I stumbled over this, but I was watching a series of hangouts like this one between Paul Elam and Dr. Tara Palmatier, who was at the first conference in Detroit. And, you know, when you don't know who he is, he may come off a bit abrasive, but when you understand of even having conversations about men's issues and the amount of deaf ears that fall on it, and the amount of, the minute that you open your mouth to say men's issues, you quickly get dismissed. People start screeching all over you, and then it's, what about us, what about us, what about us? I can see that because he's been in this for so long. Number one, there's probably a lot of frustration. And number two, he probably figured, look, the only way we get people to actually listen is to shock them. And to say something that was shocking. And I know a lot of his approach, I've heard a lot of his stuff where he would take an article that was written where a woman was doing something and the man was sort of the victim of it. And it was completely blatant. I stabbed him, whatever the case might have been. And all he did was take the article and switch the sections, and then rewrite it verbatim, and then people blew up. This is misogynist. Do you actually know if that article was written where the sexes were just changed? It was verbatim. And so that, I get that was his point, but of course, if you are trying to tell a different story, you're going to take it out of context. Here's a soundbite. The guy's a demon, right? So I know he's moved away from that, but it made its point. It drew the attention it needed to draw, and I think that was part of one of the many things that had to occur to get us to the place that we are today. Do I think it's still necessary at this point? No. I think at this point we've kind of gone beyond that. The conversation has evolved, but somebody had to blaze a trail. Somebody had to go first, and he was one of the guys that went first.
I was just going to say, you know, one of the biggest criticisms of the men's movement, and I saw this again on that ridiculous hack show last night, but one of the biggest criticisms of the men's movement is that, you know, they're all keyboard warriors and nobody's actually doing anything. Well, that's utter bullshit. You know, because we are. But they're comparing the last 5 years of, you know, maybe 10 at an absolute stretch. I think it's actually 7. But, you know, the last 5 years of activism for men's issues with the last 100 years of feminism. Like, seriously? Are you kidding me? And there's tons of us who are doing work well beyond the scope of what occurs online. And Paul is one of those. So, yeah.
Yes, exactly. It's people doing sort of what I like to say, influencing their circle of trust, or the circle of influence. And you know, rather than having one person leading the charge, I think the better approach is becoming aware of what the issues are, deciding that it's meaningful to you, and if you can make a change just within your circle of friends, and they then decide to make, change their circle of friends, that's probably the most effective way to get people to have compassion for their fathers, their children, their sons. Was there a different tenor to the conference as a result of the release of the red pill that perhaps was different than the two conferences before it, as far as you could tell? I know you weren't at the other two, but did you hear from the people saying, you know what, the whole tenor here is very different now that the movie The Red Pill came out in January? Did you hear anything like that?
I think historically The Red Pill is going to go down as the movie that really brought the men's movement into its own. And while The Red Pill was focused on, who men's rights activists are, it showed the depth of who they are. And that's where Cassie has just done us an enormous service in that sense, because she realised what a lot of us realised. I mean, I came to the men's movement in a very similar light. It was like these people were saying, we want you. And I was like, well, yeah, but I'm not sure that I want to know about this, because I've seen stuff that I think is really ugly. And then when I started having conversations with MRAs, I was like, oh, wow, that's really deep and very, very heartfelt. And I was able to see what it was and hear what it was that they were trying to say, or that they were saying. And it was a matter of just being able to listen with an open mind. And Cassie did that. So, but did that buoy things along? Hell yes. Yeah, it definitely did. But also the fact that there was so much opposition to it. Like, talk about an own goal from feminism. Sure, keep sledging, because, you've raised so much awareness, and, thank you, feminism, because you really shot yourself in the foot.
Well, you know what? Thank you, Andrew O'Keefe and the Sunrise. Thank you, Waleed, whatever your name is, from the project, because what they didn't realize is that any promotion is good promotion, even if it's bad, because people are becoming suddenly aware of something they weren't going to be aware of before. One thing I did touch on really briefly for Father's Day, which is this past Sunday, is I made a little show about 10 minutes long called Fatherlessness and the Impact on Civilization. And I talked about, yes, thank you by the way for sharing that. I appreciate that. That's also blown up quite a bit. And it talks about, obviously, for those who haven't seen it yet, the impact of not having a father in a child's life, and particularly children in general, and boys in some cases specifically. So if you get a chance to watch that, I'll include the link at the top here so that you can watch it. One last question here for you, Jasmin. I know you've got to go. I know you're watching the clock. What did you take away from the conference in terms of lessons learned, and what final words would you like to leave my viewers with?
I think all conferences that we go to tend to give us this feeling, this feeling of unity, and this feeling of, this is actually really exciting. But what I took away from it was, apart from that general sense of feeling buoyed up, was that the conference went off without a hitch. But in the broader sense, although I'm sure those working behind the scenes were working very hard to make sure that happened. But for me, it was the depth of the speakers, very important messages. Tanveer Ahmed, Mark Latham, Mark Angelucci from the National Coalition for Men was fantastic. I've got so much admiration for that man and for what he's done. Bettina, Miranda Devine, you name it. There was a great depth of speakers there. Augusto Zimmerman, who, like, when that man speaks, your heart just opens to everything that he has to say. And it was they were deep conversations about real issues. And there was it wasn't really a platform for activism. It was a platform for change and for awareness. And I think let's bring on some more.
And the whole point of activism should really be about bringing on awareness. So at some point, activism should be able to retire so that people can now become aware. And I think it's serving its purpose. Okay, Jasmin, thanks again for joining us so much. I appreciate you being here. Thank you so much. If you enjoyed the show and want to see more, join our public Facebook group called The Man Cave by Gentlemen United. All of our shows, tons of additional content, and invitations to future shows are posted there. You can add to the conversation and suggest future discussion topics you'd like to see us tackle. Please like, comment, share, and most of all, subscribe by clicking on the Gentleman icon, United icon right here. If you want to see more, click here. Thanks again for joining Gentleman United in the Man Cave.
Enjoyed the show? Like, share, and subscribe. And thanks for joining us in the Man Cave.